Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar that we're running for everyone to support them during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And obviously, during that time, we want to raise the awareness, raise everybody's understanding of cybersecurity and the actions that we need to take to keep our organizations secure. Now, it might just be one single month where we talk about this in a bit more detail, but obviously, it's something we need to do ongoing to make sure that we keep our organizations secure. But actually, it's not just our organizations. I think it's important for our everyday lives, as you know, we are all targeted by different scams, different attacks, and things we need to think about to keep our own personal data secure, which I think is critically important. Everything we do in our business lives needs to reflect in what we do with our everyday lives. So one of the things we're talking about trust no one, outsmarting social engineering in the age of deepfakes and digital deception. And, something I always think to myself, I think, oh, Rich, what is it that people really need to know around this topic?
Rich, I'd say the audience probably want to hear about the different types of deepfakes and how threat actors are using them, don't you think?
Yes, thanks, Rich. So we'll hear a little bit more from him in the not too distant future. And then we will also get into really diving down into deepfakes so we can understand what it is, what they are, and what we should be concerned about. But before we go any further, I would just like to ask Becky, who's helping me in the background, just to kick off a first poll. And I think it's a great place to start. Let's talk about you guys. So you should have the poll up there. So if you'd like to just click your answers. So it's, how would you rate your cybersecurity awareness? So we'll just give it a couple of more seconds for people to put their answers in, and then we can have a look at where everyone sees themselves sitting. So Tobek, if you want to just end the poll there so we can start looking at the results. Sorry for anybody that didn't get a chance to put their vote in. We do need to cut it off at some point. Now, the first thing I would say from those poll results is it's great that no one's answering what's cybersecurity. So we all have some level of awareness. We've also got some cyber experts on the webinar today. Potentially people from our cybersecurity teams, but excellent if the people that answered that are not. And it's great to see people taking that seriously. But the vast majority are somewhere between being reasonably confident with security best practices and not being fully confident with security best practices. And hopefully during the course of this webinar, particularly around the topics of deepfakes, digital deception, and others, we can help you raise that to get closer to the top level. So thank you very much for getting involved in that. So I think we can end that poll now. Thanks, Becky. Or Rebecca, should I say. So let's look at really, our starting point is how organizations are compromised. And obviously by compromised, we can look at a multitude of different ways that our organizations are compromised and what that effect can be. The vast majority are to really steal data. That's what's important to an organization. It's what needs to be protected, but it's not the only thing that's important. And for those that are in the UK, or it's probably don't need to be in the UK because it's sort of headline news. Very recently we've seen that Jaguar Land Rover has had to halt all of their production, and the government in the UK is now bailing out their supply chain, as they're such is almost hand to mouth with a just-in-time delivery of parts. We've seen the M&S and Co-op group breaches that again have brought those businesses to a halt. So it's not just data that we need to think about protecting, it's also think about how we protect our infrastructure that operates within our organization. So it's critically important that we all play our part as part of this. So how are organizations compromised? Well, the primary way they're compromised is social engineering. Social engineering, really targets people to try and use, influence, trying to use coercive methods to act against their will. And we'll dive down into social engineering shortly because I think it's extremely important as part of how do we look at deep fakes? How do we look at digital deception? Another way that organizations are compromised is through compromised credentials, so credentials compromise. And again, this is attackers looking at the more easier targets where we may have provided our credentials into stealing those credentials, so our usernames and our passwords, particularly when they're reused, and using those to compromise more high value accounts. To put that in perspective and to make that to look at actually what that means, it's when we're reusing our credentials for a local retailer that may not have the highest levels of security, and those being the same ones we use for our organization. Now, clearly, we need to look at better methods, and we'll touch upon some of those a little bit later. But the use of passwords, we need to look at how we can move beyond that, and particularly how we can support using more unique passwords. And then lastly, we have device compromise. So a lot of attackers are targeting vulnerabilities within devices, whether that's personal devices, whether that's systems within an organization, looking for weaknesses to exploit. Now, you might think, that is something that our IT teams need to worry about, that our cybersecurity teams need to worry about. But actually, as we'll come on to a little bit later, there is still a part for each of us. And that's probably the most important point that I can make today, that it's not just an IT issue, it's not just a cybersecurity issue. In the past, we've talked about us, the end users, as being that weakest link in the security stack. But actually, that is not true. We are the strongest link. We are the first line of defense, and we need to set ourselves up to be that first line of defense so that we can defend both our organizations, protect the data, protect our colleagues and our customers, but also protect ourselves in our daily lives as the same practices apply in work as well as out of work. But let's move on to really how that perception of the weak link is there. And actually, a study by Gartner, who are technology analysts and business analysts that provide a lot of insights to the industry. They carried out a study for user behaviors and attitudes to potentially put data at risk for organizations, but also for themselves. And they found some interesting insights. So they surveyed a huge amount of people and asked them a few questions. Now, what they found was that 67% of users use the same password for multiple accounts. That just goes back to what I was mentioning about credentials compromise and compromised credentials. The very easy way is that reuse of passwords. So something that we shouldn't be doing, but it's still very much happening, and people are admitting to it. And another 65% said they opened emails and attachments from unknown sources on work devices. Again, something I think that we've all kind of aware of, but still seems to be happening. Also, we see that 61% send sensitive information via email that's unencrypted. Again, putting that data at risk as we're sending it. So these are probably three things that we're all aware of. We all sit down and go through cybersecurity awareness training, which is important, but we need to think about it more from, what are our behaviors? And the reason why that's important is, 93% of people acknowledged that, these actions, they understood that it would lead to enterprise risk, but clearly quite a few are doing it anyway. So that's what we're here to do, is to think about, well, actually, we're not going to be in that 93%. We're not going to be in those 67, 65, or 61%. We are going to act securely. And part of that is, how are we going to deal with the topic of social engineering? As I said, social engineering is one of the primary ways that organizations are compromised. So let's have a look at what social engineering is. So social engineering focuses on exploiting the human vulnerability. And it's important, it's in bold there, and it might not be as visible as it needs to be. Maybe I needed to make the font slightly bigger, but it's important to state that we are all susceptible to it. There is nobody that can say, we're 100%, I would never get socially engineered. It's something we have to be hugely aware of. And even, everyone, even in our business. So Integrity360 are cybersecurity experts, but it's something that we all need to think about. And their objective is to use deception and manipulation to really persuade us to give up information or perform acts, against our own interest and the interest of our businesses. And why? I think it's probably quite easy, quite obvious why. It's to execute, scam, fraud, identity theft, so that we can. That's probably something important we think about in our own daily lives. Making sure that we don't allow our identities to be stolen, because that enables malicious people to stand up loans in our name. And others. We look at for using social engineering to deliver malware and ransomware. I'm sure we've all heard about ransomware. That is the actions and activity that was taken in those breaches that I mentioned: Co-op, M&S, Jaguar Land Rover, and really, that is one of their primary delivery methods, is to socially engineer people into opening those emails, opening those attachments from unknown senders. And how are they doing this? Well, how are they being successful? Well, social engineering is successful because they play on our own psychology and exploiting that vulnerability. So they look at manipulating common motivations and emotions. So really looking at multiple different strands, whether it's down to fear and creating that fear, that something's going to happen, our account is going to be closed if we don't take action very quickly. We're going to lose some money if we don't act very, very quickly. So, putting that fear in there, creating that urgency. Urgency is very important. So, if we think anybody's trying to make us do something urgently, we need to step back and think about, why they're asking that, and is that the right thing to do? They also play on greed, whether it's looking for tax refunds, if it's an email attachment that talks about staff bonuses. They're all playing into some of these psychological traits that we all have, but also that cognitive bias. So we have a lot of mental shortcuts, and it's really exploiting that, and also trust that they look to exploit. And there are some principles of persuasion that they used. So I talked about urgency, creating that urgency, but they play on things like authority. So when there's an authoritative command, we tend to sit up and we tend to listen to that. And again, those mental shortcuts come in, that we might take an action that we shouldn't, that we know we shouldn't, but actually we're feeling under pressure to go and do it. I talked about some of those other elements, so scarcity. Something that is, we've only got a limited time, or it's very unique, we need to act upon it. They might be using distraction. So another principle of persuasion is distract people from the actual scam. And importantly, personalization. So making it very personal to ourselves. And it's important, when I said we're all susceptible to it, it's because scammers, threat actors as we call them, they're highly entrepreneurial. And there is a scam for everybody, whether it's a romance scam for people that are looking for love, whether it's a get-rich-quick scam for people that are keen to improve their bank account, or whether it's an investment scam for those that have the capital and want to take advantage of something very, very quickly. So there's a scam for everybody, and we shouldn't feel embarrassed if we fall for one of those scams, because, as I say, we're all susceptible to it. but it's the actions that we take. We should be looking, actually, can we get help? Can I flag that, particularly when it's in the business, so that we can react as quick as possible? So never be embarrassed, but just take action. That's the most important thing. So let's talk about the threat from phishing. Phishing is one of those primary ways that organizations and people are exploited and targeted. Well, actually, I think we're all in the same boat. And if we look at, there's a report called the Verizon Data Breach Report, and this looks at all of the data breaches over a year, that pulls all of that information from across the industry to look at what are the actions, what's the commonality. Which is actually 68% of breaches involve a non-malicious human element. So opening phishing emails or taking actions that perhaps we wouldn't take. And it's, as I say, it's not just those compromised credentials. It's not targeting devices. The most effective way is to target us, the users. We see that 94% of all malware, particularly ransomware, is delivered by email. So we need to be very conscious of that when we're looking at our emails and opening attachments. Very similar, the Isaka report, really provided that backing to the Verizon data breach report around human-based attacks like phishing. But I think the most astounding stat that I can give you when it comes to phishing is, since the advent and launch of ChatGPT in 2022, we have seen a massive rise in the number of phishing emails, over 4,000%. It's really being fueled by generative AI. AI is so critical. It's a part of our everyday life, and really enables people to carry a lot of actions to be able to convince. And that's important when it comes to phishing. There are many different types of phishing attacks. We have the classic email phishing, and which has really moved on. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. We have that spear phishing, so really targeted based phishing. And we have whaling, so there's obviously quite a lot of terms that we throw around with phishing. So looking at there's high value and targets inside an organization, trying to convince people to part with cash or to take actions that they wouldn't normally take. We have smishing. I think that's really important for us, both in terms of our work lives, but probably more in our personal lives. I don't know how many people have got a message from UPS, FedEx, all talking about a parcel and a package, asking us to click a link. I'd be extremely, extremely cautious if you're receiving any text messages like that. And typically they will take you to a landing page that is going to try and trick you into putting in and making a payment. At that point, they've got your credit card details, and you've probably made a payment into their account. We also see vishing. So this is voice-based phishing, particularly around voicemail, so asking you to take actions. And again, just reflecting back on some of those things that we need to think about, what to look for in those emails is urgency, looking for copycat domains, and I'll cover those in a second, unknown senders, and unexpected emails and attachments. So how do we defend against them? I've got an example of a phishing email targeted at myself. And obviously this was part of a phishing campaign, and I'm sure all of your organizations run these. And again, they're not there to catch you out. They're not there to embarrass anybody. They are there to help us spot these phishing attacks. So the things we need to look for are typos. Quite common for the emails to be written in poor English or poor Swedish or poor French, and obviously any other languages. Also, don't trust the display name. So as you can see in that example, Peter Smith. Now this is an easy one for me to spot because Peter Smith is not my manager, but they're trying to masquerade as being. But looking at the if we're trusting the sender, it's saying it's Peter Smith, but actually it's a completely different email. When I talked about copycat domains, quite often that we'll get a letter swap. So I'm sure, looking at SMSs, looking at emails that we're encouraging you to click a link to Amazon rather than Amazon. And as I said, anything around urgency. Now, I talked about AI, and I think this is probably the important bit where we get into looking at some of that digital deception, some are looking at those deep fakes. But I think it begs the question, how are attackers utilizing AI? Now, a bit they're doing is they're using it to build that malware, build that ransomware quicker, make it more effective. Now, that's partly for our security teams to worry about. But again, we've got to know that it's continuing to happen and be very vigilant of activity. I'll come on a little bit to that later. They're using it to analyze targets quicker and more effectively. And why is that important to all of us? Well, actually, that's really where they can start building the profile, building social engineering activity. And they're using it, as we talked about, before, that huge surge in phishing emails, because they're using it to enhance those emails, to make them, do it quicker, make them more effective. So we saw the quickness with that ability for the number to increase by 4,000%. But it's important we ask the question, why? Why is that happening? Well, partly because attackers now speak multiple languages. They are able to create once, use them, translate into plenty of languages, and then play a numbers game. So being able to send those out. And also we're seeing them become more effective. Gone are the days that a Nigerian prince would contact you because he had $300 million in gold bars and just needed 30,000 just to help him get it out and send it all to yourself. Or gone are the days, we talk about poorly worded emails. We still see them, but actually, by putting information, putting text into ChatGPT, Claude AI, any other AI model, and generative AI model and assistants, we can get that back in probably far better English than most of us can write. So, quite often, more the things change, the more they stay the same. As I say, it's exactly the same approaches, but they're just able to make it more sophisticated, quicker to exploit, larger in volume, and more targeted. So I like to always talk about the cybersecurity basics are as important now as they've ever been. And that's important for all of us. They're the piece that we can play as part of it. Now, as I've hinted at, it's not all about doing the same things. They are doing some new things. And obviously, we're talking about novel and new AI-based threats, and specifically deepfakes, demonstrated here by our former friends that were operating out of the White House, here dancing for us. And obviously, you can probably say I can spot that that's a deepfake. As Donald Trump's waistcoat suddenly appears as he's thrusting his chest out. But actually, the real way you can spot it, as this is actually how they dance. And I think this was to the YMCA at a New Year's Eve party. A little bit more robotic. So not as smooth as our previous one. So that's quite easy to be able to spot. But let's look at the primary deepfake misuses. How is it being misused? Well, predominantly it's around digital communications. So generating fake videos, as we just saw, creating fake audio and fake messaging. We see it a lot in terms of influence operations. So again, it's fake online videos, fake pictures to really change our perception, trying to mimic other people, make it very tangible to try and change our opinion or trick us into thinking someone's saying something that they're actually not. We also see it starting to try and fake and abuse and fooling some of our biometric authentication, although that's something that's on the periphery. And we also see it in terms of application submission processes, so faking that identity verification process. But for the focus for this webinar, and the thing that I think we need to focus on the most and get aware of and getting understanding of is that digital communications. So again, I'm going to enlist somebody else to help us with this point. And that's Albert Einstein. So this is a portrait of him during a lecture in Vienna in 1921. And if you're wondering what he might have talked about, how he may have acted during that lecture, I think I might have just said webinar a second ago. We can now get a very good idea. Now, this is a AI video of exactly the same still picture created by using OmniHuman, and as you can see, exactly what the challenge is.
What would art be like without emotions? It would be empty. What would our lives be like without emotions? They would be empty of values. So a famous classical poet said, "We hate and we love. Can one tell me why?" Catullus. Science does not answer why questions.
So thank you very much, Einstein. I think you can see from that how realistic AI video generation has got to. We saw my AI avatar at the very start, but very obviously AI is, I don't think my shoulders moved too much, a little bit of head movement and obviously lip syncing. But in this one, we can see that actually Albert Einstein is moving and very lifelike around exactly how he potentially would have during that talk and lecture that he was doing way back in 1921. And the reason why it's important is actually, do you know what? It's very easy to be able to do voice cloning. This is something that our team here put together, and just doing some cloning of myself. And the important thing is actually these are all a mixture of, or created through a mixture of both applications that we have built into Microsoft Windows, but also freely available tools that can be used for free or use the enhanced versions for a relatively small cost. So we'll just walk through actually how easy that is. So this is just some content from a previous webinar that I did. I won't play the whole thing for you. It's probably about 45 minutes long. But talking about balancing the human cyber equation, which I think is very important for this webinar. But the team took that's my voice just talking through some cybersecurity concepts. They took that and just put it through a Microsoft tool to be able to downloaded that and importantly extract the audio. So once we extracted the audio using that tool, we then put it into another platform called 11 Labs. And 11 Labs gives us the ability to take that audio clip, train it on my voice, so we can then start to make me say whatever we need to make me say. So that's really where we come to text to speech. And what the team did is they thought, you know what, Rich is the sort of guy that loves a bit of poetry. I think he should recite a little bit of Wordsworth.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze.
So I think that's very realistic, and if it wasn't for one little thing, I would, I could be fooled into believing. Actually, do you know what? I did read that poetry. I'm not a poet. I haven't read any poetry recently. But actually, the thing that gave that away is I'm from the southern part of England, and we say dancing rather than dancing. So that was the giveaway there for me. But for others, not so easy to be able to pick out. But it's not just being able to do that as text to speech. Actually, importantly, I now speak 26 plus languages, a very easy Google Translate, and actually I speak pretty perfect Afrikaans these days.
Ek het eensaam rondgedwaal soos nevel, wat op loeë valleie en houwels dryf. Toe ek skielik en skare sien, en skare goue afverdille, langs die meer, onder die bome, wat in die briesie fladder en dans.
So there we go. If you ever wondered what Wordsworth is like in Afrikaans, there it is. And actually, some of our South African colleagues have reviewed that. Actually, it's pretty perfect when it comes to Afrikaans. So how is it being used? Well, it's voicemails, audio messaging, live audio conversations, off-camera conferencing, combining with video deepfakes. And actually, that's important when we talk about off-camera conferencing. How many people join a Teams call, a Zoom call, and cameras are off? So it makes it very easy to be able to mimic somebody when it's just their voice. As I say, it's very trivial to do. So we need to start thinking about that and how can we combat it? But we'll come on to some more advanced bits shortly. So it's being used in messaging. So again, going back to that approach, attackers, masquerading as legitimate and importantly authority figures, with urgent requests or action. They're luring employees, personalizing the message to make their identities seem more credible, and being able to pull that information together, makes that possible. They use the use of generative AI, to ensure the correct language, spelling, grammar, and that sense of urgency. And then, I say, combining that with audio. And actually, there's a great example where Ferrari were targeted by deepfakes through messaging. And that common approach, and we've actually seen an example of this internally at Integrity360, very similar. But in the Ferrari case, the CFO was messaged by the CEO and started chatting about the need to transfer some funds. And actually, the CFO thought, actually, this doesn't seem quite right. And obviously, during this, the request was actually, let's switch to audio mode. And at that point, you're listening to somebody's voice. So either a call or leaving voice notes. But as he twigged, I'm not 100% sure of this. He asked the CEO about a book recommendation he'd made 2 weeks previous. Now, obviously, the attackers had absolutely no idea what that was, so thwarted it straight away. So we can start taking some learnings from that. Let's think about if things are off. Let's ask those questions. It doesn't need to be, hopefully somebody asked me for a book reference, but we can ask questions, or actually we can say, do you know what? I will get back to you and I'll make a call back, and calling them on their number that you know and that you trust. As quite often, these will have been fake numbers, fake accounts, to be able to try and trick you into thinking you're speaking and messaging to the person that you're not, unfortunately. But that's just taking messaging using voice, but we can start extending that. And through lip syncing, we can get anyone to say anything. And here's our friend Rich again. And actually through trivial methods, and it's very easy to do. A simple Google will give you the tools, give you that guidance. And again, we can now make my avatar recite Wordsworth.
Ek het eensaam rondgedwaal soos nevel, wat op loeë valleie en houwels dryf. Toe ek skielik en skare sien, en skare goue af.
So I think that's enough for me speaking Afrikaans, and obviously I'm not South African and I don't speak Afrikaans. But you can see there that we can take that text, that speech, analyze it, use the text, change the language, and then make a reasonably convincing still video of myself reciting Wordsworth in a different language. Take that back to the Einstein example. We can get more advanced and we can actually start making people moving. And just think about the power that has overall. We've actually seen this being used in actual attacks. So a engineering firm in the UK called Arup, they were unfortunately tricked into and defrauded to the tune of $25 million through a deep fake of the CFO. And this was one unfortunate member of the finance team that was targeted through exactly those social engineering techniques, putting pressure on, urgency, authority, being able to use deepfakes to represent people and convince that they need to make that transfer. And that's exactly what they did. And this wasn't just on email. This wasn't just on text messages or voice messages or voice calls. This was done over video. So tricked into joining a video call and convinced to make that transfer to 5 different bank accounts. What that person didn't realize that they were the only person on that video call that was real. The rest were all simulated fakes. And there is plenty of publicly available video of staff, particularly senior members of staff, that can be used to deepfake people, video, audio, being able to pull it all together. And in this instance, it was pre-generated content that was put together. We can actually even take that further. There are now tools there that can do this in real time and allow us to stream that over Teams. So real-time mimicking of people's look and voice. But I will say, they haven't been they haven't been developed to the level where it's believable. We can see it's on the horizon. Now, I've thrown a lot of issues out there, and to kind of bring that to life so we can all understand, well, actually, do you know what? It's very realistic. We need to start thinking about that. And it all comes back to our responsibility, and how can we combat it? And I think a lot of it comes down to how can we challenge. So how can we challenge? How can we be confident to challenge our colleagues, our business leaders, when we're not sure? In this case, really the actions, and again, we can't victimize the person that took that action because it was a highly competent attack that was levied against them. But probably they didn't have the understanding. Well, actually, what can be done? So, why would, if you don't have that knowledge, why would you ever assume that people that and what they look like, how they sound, are on a video call? Why would you question? But actually, now we have that understanding. We need to get confident and competent in challenging our members of our colleagues, senior leaders, on exactly these types of situations. Clearly, if anybody's asking you to transfer any funds, taking that through a different communications channel, calling that person on their mobile phone that you can verify from the corporate directory, not just purely communicating on email. And even if it's on a video, I would take that away and say, okay, I will come back to you, and then again follow up with a call. Nobody is going to be disappointed if they're being asked again to confirm the validity of a request. So with that, I'm just going to ask Rebecca to launch our second poll to really understand where we see ourselves in that situation. So how confident are you to challenge a colleague, especially a senior member of the business, when they're not following best practice or are concerned about a request? So we've got quite a few responses there. In the interest of time, Rebecca, I think we'll just cap it at that point, please. And if we could share those results with them, I think it's great to see that the vast majority are confident and they feel empowered. And I think that really talks to what our organizations are doing to create that security culture. And although we have some that are wary about raising something and are not confident, I would encourage you to do that and speak to managers about that, because you should be supported in your organization. And I truly believe that actually all of the organizations that we all work with will be promoting that openness. I know that from the organizations I'm talking to as part of Security Awareness Month, that is the thing that they are, the topic and the subject that they're talking about is really about that confidence around how do we create that resilience through our secure behaviors and processes. Thank you, Rebecca. So moving on, let's start looking at how we can protect our data. So protecting data, protecting credentials. We talked about it at the very start. Using unique passwords on all of our accounts. Now, sometimes that can be very difficult to do. We can use, particularly because we need to use long and memorable phrases where we're creating passwords, so that we can try and remember them. So things like, I like coffee in the morning. Now, to be clear, that's not one of my passwords, but it's putting in those spaces and making it extremely difficult to guess. The longer a password, the harder it is for it to be cracked. How do people try and crack those passwords? Well, they do a process called brute forcing, which is when they'll just use the computing power available to them to try and as many combinations. They start with the dictionary and then they look for multiple combinations. So it gets harder and harder for them to guess. So we need to make them long, but actually it's very, very difficult for us to remember those and to have unique passwords. So what do we need to use? We need to use password generators and password safes. We now have them built in. We now carry around our own password safes, and that's our mobile phones. So I'd encourage you to make use of those every single time you're setting a password. So you have secure storage of them. You don't need to remember them. They can be highly complex, and making sure that we're using those over and over again. And obviously, the phone will fill it in for you, so it makes it nice and easy. And then you're using on biometric authentication. But even then, we can access it and we can copy and paste it one time. But even better, I would advise the use of multi-factor authentication. I have no doubt that all of your security teams and IT teams have implemented multi-factor authentication, but it's important that we bring this and use it in our personal lives. They're provided free of charge. For example, the Google Authenticator. I know Adobe have an authenticator for those users. Microsoft have an authenticator. But let's make use of those, using our sign-ins to that to be able to use one-time passwords or one-time tokens, or using that biometric authentication. So where we have a chance of using them, make sure that we are, because then passwords are not important. And that's where we need to get to. Passwordless is the key. So let's just talk about protecting devices. So I talked about at the start, threat actors and attackers do target vulnerable devices. And again, how does this apply to us as the end users? As a lot of this sits with our IT teams. And I know sometimes we can get frustrated when our machine is looking to restart, but I would encourage you just to try and do that as quickly as soon as possible. And don't be frustrated when there's an enforced restart. Generally, that's because there's something critical, there's something that is being actively used, and we need to support that. But we also need to regularly update our devices. So when we get that red bubble over the systems icon in an Apple device, I'm not a Google user, unfortunately, but I'm sure there's something very similar. Let's make sure that we are doing those software updates, because they will address vulnerabilities and critical vulnerabilities at that. So protecting our devices, our phone's probably our most important device, particularly personally, but also regularly updating the apps that we're using. So that should be an ongoing process. And also don't download unknown or free apps from unknown locations. Just be very conscious of that. Many of those are offered for free because, again, playing on our psychology that we want to take things that are free, but we can't trust them. But also let's help identify compromised devices. So we should ask questions. If all out of the blue, we're finding that our devices are slow and we're getting poor performance, or there's unexpected activity, we're finding that our applications are crashing unexpectedly, then I would raise this to your teams. It's better to be safe than sure. But better be safe and sure than not, is what I meant to say there. So let's look at protecting data. Well, let's store files and data on our corporate storage. Generally, all of us will have our corporate OneDrive or SharePoint or another platform for storage of our data. Might be Google Drive or others. Let's use that. Don't put it on your personal storage, and avoid putting it on any local storage. If we're uploading it into the cloud, into our corporate storage, not only is that secure, encrypted, the access to that is limited, and you can control that in terms of sharing it to only the people that you need to. And that's important, making sure that we're only sharing that with the people. So everything needs to be on that principle of least privilege, need to know when we're sharing data. And also, if we are sharing it, making sure that we're only sharing it confidential information via encrypted channels. If you're not sure of what encrypted channels are available to you, please speak to your IT and security teams. They will be able to advise. They want you to be able to continue working in the most secure manner possible. Talking about encryption, using that corporate storage also means that your data is encrypted. And then lastly, going back to AI, we need to be extremely careful in what data we upload to public AI tools. Many organizations will be putting controls in place to limit what we can do, but that's not ubiquitous and not across the board. And it is one of the principal threats when it comes to AI, not being attacked by AI. I think that's, it's overhyped in the media, but actually it's our, secure or insecure use of AI tools. So very, very importantly, yes, your AI is there to be able to assist us. If your organization isn't providing you with a secure and corporate AI, whether that's Microsoft Copilot or others, I would just ask that question. But most importantly, yes, we might use it as our assistant to try and get some information, but don't upload documents. Particularly any sensitive documents. Don't upload excerpts of information. You might say why? The reason is that those public AI tools use that information to train their models. They actually take it and store it. And although they use it for training, you've got to bear in mind that actually that training can come out in the responses to which which other users input. And we've seen evidence of this. In fact, actually, I've got a great example of ChatGPT personally, where I was using it for one application, and then just as a group of friends, I was asking ChatGPT about ourselves, and actually it referenced some information that I'd put in there previously. So it knew who I was and referenced something completely different. And the only way it would know that is from the prompts that I'd given it. So be entirely wary and conscious of what we're uploading to AI. So we're just going to jump to a Q&A. There is a Q&A function as part of Zoom. So please use that if you have any questions. And obviously, if you've got any questions outside of that, please reach out to the team. You can reach out to myself. And we will help support you as much as possible in your journey and in your daily lives when it comes to cybersecurity. While we're just waiting for some questions to come in, I can see that we have a question in there already, and please don't be shy and please ask questions. I'll just recap on some of the things that we've talked about. And I think the first thing is to think about social engineering. And as I said, we're all fallible. It doesn't matter who you are. And actually, when we talked about some of those statistics in breaches having a root cause of non-malicious human activity, there's a good percentage of those are IT and security users, expertise or experts that have made those made mistakes. So again, no one's going to be persecuted for it, but we just need to be conscious of how we're being targeted, how we're being manipulated. Watch out for anything that has urgency, particularly from an authority figure, or not just figures, but also we see it being from the police, being from inland revenue, HMRC, Revenue Commissioner's Office. We see it from healthcare professionals, all trying to, and also from our, the organizations we use for our shopping, which are critically important, and anything that's too good to be true. Question and challenge people and colleagues if you're unsure of something. We need, particularly when we see, might be a video call that we're on and we're not 100% sure of. But I will say, the likelihood of it being AI is very minimal at the time, right now, but we need to start thinking about it, particularly when it comes to audio messages that we're receiving. And then lastly, protect your devices, protect your credentials across all of your social media, your applications, across your websites, and where possible, make sure that you're using a password safe built into your device and multi-factor authentication, and keep those devices updated so we're protected. So let's just have a look at some of the QA because we have some questions in there. And one of the questions is, AI is a double-edged sword for sure. How to protect organizations from the negative side of it? Where or any specific security domain should they start with? So, Joe, I will answer that question. I'm sure that's probably from one of the IT experts and, the IT members or security people from our organizations. Actually, in fact, we've done an entire webinar based on that that is available online, and we'll share the details for it afterwards. But to protect your organization, it's making sure that we've got the data security controls in place, making sure that we're providing safe and secure AI systems in place, and preventing or governing access to other AI systems. We look at there is an AI Act being introduced by the EU for safe and ethical use. So aligning to that is going to be a responsibility for every organization, and looking at a framework that can support that. We have a question from Angelo asking about detections in place for the misuse of AI. Yes, there are detections and capabilities to look for that. And again, going back to tools that are in there, such Microsoft tools to support. And lastly, are there any challenges with using password safe on different devices, e.g. Android phone to Microsoft Windows laptop? Technical challenges with being able to share it is true. Being able to save those credentials is something that you can do between the two, and I'd encourage you to. I think the use of the authentication tools, the multi-factor authentication tools, are the way to overcome that, particularly when we look at different domains, different devices, where we're signing in with our Google account that will prompt us to authenticate ourselves onto our phone. It means that we don't need to worry about passwords. So that is really the way forward. And using a password safe, we can obviously access that to enter the password manually. Obviously, don't copy and paste it into an email and email it to yourself. It is entering it manually, and then it can be saved in that password safe within your browser, which again is a secure way of approaching that. We have another question in. We've got two more questions coming in. Moving to continual role-based training is essential, but the market seems to be immature. How do you see this progressing? So I think it's important that we tailor our training, and that's important part of how do we move to away from it just being security awareness, which is critically important, but into secure behaviors, and that's only going to be driven by being able to look at those behaviors and responding to those. And actually, that is an area of where the market is starting to mature into, being able to analyze people's activity, particularly around their inboxes, to tie that all together and recommend the actions and the training that's needed. So that is something that is progressing. And if that's a technical IT or security user that needs assistance with that, please reach out to your account manager and we can follow up and assist with that. And the last question I have in, we've got 4 minutes before we close out, so I appreciate all of your time on this webinar, is how can we prevent users from uploading sensitive organizational information to AI platforms? So again, probably another technical user here. And we can look at using platforms. So I'm going to pick on Microsoft security platforms. There are others available. But using DLP tools so data loss prevention tools like Microsoft Purview, that can be configured to and also combining that with Microsoft Cloud App Security to control access, to be able to audit access of what's being uploaded, and importantly, where we're using platforms to generate documents from other documents, making sure that the sensitivity of that document isn't downgraded during that process. So there are tools available to help us with that process all the way from start to finish. So I don't think we have any more questions in. We've coming up upon the hour. So I'm just going to really close out by thanking everybody for joining this webinar today as we look through some of the ways that that we can protect ourselves, our organization, and really bring into light some of those threats that are on the horizon and less well known, which is really how attackers can use deepfakes and digital deception, and we need to think about that. And the most important points that I can probably summarize again is, be confident to challenge, be confident to raise anything that you find suspicious. Everybody will support that, and we are the first line of defense, the strongest link in any security stack. Thank you very much.